bill. And then, so Will, you've done this before, I'm sure, in other committees, Representative Greer. If you can just sort of give us, what the bill's about, why you're introducing, what problem it's trying to solve, and then we will have Dutch Council follow you and walk us through the bill, section by section.
Okay, well, I'll keep it as brief as possible behind kind of the reason for it and also some of the information I found that kind of supported my viewpoint on this. But I'm Will, I'm Representative Greer, and thank you, Chairman. This is a bill around dynamic pricing, which is kind of a new emerging technology that several major retailers around the country are exploring. There were reports done over the summer and fall that I was made aware of by constituents where chains such as Kroger, Walmart, other retailers, I don't know exactly which ones have branches in Vermont or not, that were exploring opportunities to have electronic price labels or shopping labels on different aisles where they could be able to use some kind of surveillance type approach to determining the price of goods based on demand of them, based on individuals that were coming to get it, based on other factors beyond the person getting it. Like if the temperature was warm outside, did they feel like that would make the product more a higher demand product for that day, and they thought they could raise the price on that day. We have some laws obviously around that, but they can, skirt the issue with the fact that now there's emerging technologies where maybe it doesn't fit into some of our statute that's outdated, I guess you could say. But I just want to say that this bill in its current form is not a ban. It's just simply a moratorium so that we can study this more and make sure that if it is something that consumers, which I'll get into the numbers because I don't believe that they like this, but that way, if information evolves here in the next couple of years, we can change our approach to it rather than just an outright ban, because that's originally what I had wanted to do. But obviously I want to learn and, keep up with the times and the technology. But so it's just a temporary moratorium on this, and just general consumer sentiment that I want to put out there that's around dynamic pricing. A majority of US consumers, 62%, find that dynamic pricing is unfair, and that only 17% of consumers consider it to be fair, and that 21% are undecided or neutral on the topic. Probably, people that are in the camp that I was of trying to just hear more information about it. Specific sector sentiment in terms of retail establishments that sell grocery products, those kinds of household products, 74% consider dynamic pricing unfair in those situations. And on essential goods, and I could find more information about what they determined an essential good, but 69% of consumers express very negative views about that. Consumers are slightly more accepting of dynamic pricing in areas like entertainment events, which was a 41% unfair perception of it being used there, and airline tickets, which 45% viewed as unfair. And we do see that there are some companies that use some levels of dynamic pricing. I'm sure we've read about the reports that Uber, Lyft, and other companies like that use. It's not exactly dynamic pricing. I'm slipping on the term right now, but essentially on-demand pricing, I think, might be a better way to encapsulate it. Impact on consumer behavior. I thought this would be an important one to highlight, that 62% of consumers say they would be more loyal to retailers if consistent pricing was guaranteed in their products. And 59% said they would actively avoid retailers known to frequently change prices dynamically. So not only are we just talking about what legally is the right thing to do, but also in terms of making sure our businesses are appealing to the customers on a larger basis. Transparency concerns. About 70% of consumers reported concerns that retailers using dynamic pricing did not use clear disclosures on their products. And so that's another aspect of this that we could explore, as well as how do you notify a consumer about this being used. But in addition to this bill, there's a lot of other bills being circulated around the country right now on this topic around surveillance-based pricing, around algorithmic pricing that they would be using to determine a product's price on the shelf label. In terms of any more additional details, I think the only other thing I'd want to add is just at the federal level, there have been there's there's been research. There's been, or not research, but there's been claims that Congress is looking into this and that the Federal Trade Commission has also been looking into this as well over the past year. I believe it was in 24, in 24, Senator Bob Casey and Senator Elizabeth Warren, they did send inquiries into major grocers, including Kroger, about electronic shelf labels and warning that, quote, dynamic pricing allows corporations to, in their words, price gouge and suddenly raise the cost of goods without warning. And they caution that digital price tags could lead to surge pricing for essentials and urge transparency. Again, like I said, people want transparency around this and around these practices in general. Federal Trade Commission is looking into this as well. So I'm happy to take any questions before I turn it over to Michael.
All right, thank you. Representative O'Brien.
Just, is it like, even though the jurisdictionally, we don't usually hear about like Dickinson. Is it really the food grocery store dynamic pricing
That's the main, I was going to say that's the main reason. And I think too, because it may or may not be a weights and measures component to it as well. But in terms of what I was hearing from people, it was mainly the grocery stores. That was their main concern because all of us as consumers, those are going to be the main places we go to on a daily or regular basis.
So something like eggs, for example, might be dynamic pricing.
Yeah.
Representative.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Greer. Yes, I'm trying to get into the 21st century and understand the notion of dynamic. In a grocery store that I'm familiar with, you'll go in, whether it's magnetic or it's, a little sleeve that say price per pound or buy two, get 50% off one line.
Yeah.
But with dynamic pricing, you use the word digital form. Would there be like an electronic, like at a gas station, you go right by the pumps or this, you might drive back your way home. It can be done from taking in not AI, but just intel from what's going on at the temperature. It becomes a digital price tag instead of a printed one.
Exactly.
So it can be instantaneous.
Exactly. And so
that's what dynamic
pricing. Yeah. Yeah.
Surveillance-based pricing.
And so all the stores I shop at, this was another reason why it was an interesting, query that I was getting. All the stores I shop at still have all their paper labels where they put the price on there. I'm sure AOA has regulations around how long it can stay there, how often they can change it. I'm not familiar with those regulations. But just like you would at a gas station, how it shows, when you're filling up, your car and it shows how much you're putting in it and then the price there, it would be similar to that. But the question is, I have been in stores in other states where they do have those electronic labels, but I guess my question would be, because this was obviously before these reports that I was seeing those labels on, was how frequently they were able to change those labels and what factors were going into changing those labels. Because I've read something and I forget which report it's in, so pardon me for not having the exact information on me, of where they were hoping to potentially, some retailers, not everyone, have cameras where they would identify how much that product was being pulled off the shelf. And the question I have is, are they basing those decisions on how, potentially they know the person's income, where the person lives? Are they able to identify that consumer? Because then that gets into a whole, issue of legality there, because that you can't discriminate based on that right now. And that's, I believe, federal law. But that would just be something interesting because we've not delved into the idea of artificial intelligence having discriminatory factors in consumer purchasing patterns.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
Are there examples of this in Vermont? I mean, I guess because we're all on the internet, for example, but any grocery stores doing this?
So to my knowledge, I don't have an answer on that. In terms of my region, I've not seen any. I think, though, that's a good sign for us, and taking a precautionary just 2-year moratorium is that way we don't get it here and then we're tangled up in a huge web, which is one reason we kind of wanted it to just get passed as soon as possible. That way we could, pause it, not have to worry about it, and then we can figure out how to proceed cautiously.
Good. Let's have Mike come up and walk us through the bill.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Will.
So this is Michael Grady with Legislative Counsel looking at H371, and act relating to the use of dynamic pricing by retail establishments. Just for some additional context, the Agency of Agriculture is the agency in the state that has regulatory authority over weights and measures, including a provision in Title VI related to unit pricing. And the requirement that a unit price and a total price be displayed for every consumer commodity that's sold in the state. A consumer commodity is any food, drug, device, or cosmetic and other article, product, or commodity of any other kind or class except for drugs sold only by prescription that are customarily produced for sale to retail sales agencies or instrumentalities for consumption by individuals, for use by individuals for purposes of personal care, or in the performance of services ordinarily rendered in or around the household, and that are usually consumed or expended in the course of such consumptive use. So when Representative Greer was looking to implement or introduce this bill, I reached out to the agency. They are exploring amending their unit pricing laws. They are aware of dynamic pricing and the use of electronic shelf labels. They weren't prepared this session to go forward with the bill or to support the bill because they wanted to look at some of the national organizations, just like APCO for the plant food. There's a unit pricing or a consumer pricing agency that the agency belongs to. So this is really kind of a stopgap until the agency comes back in 2026 or 2027. But it serves that consumer protection need of not allowing retailers to use dynamic pricing in a way that can undermine consumer protection. From what I've read, the concerns are that the dynamic pricing will change once the consumer is in the store. So the consumer comes in having maybe done some research or looking to balance their budget, and they have an understanding of what the price of the product is. They go to the shelf, they buy it for the price that was on, or they put it in their cart with the price that was labeled at that time. By the time they get to the cashier, the price has changed. And now the Agency of Ag generally is supposed to go out and confirm that prices being advertised are accurate. And they do kind of model shopping trips where they go in looking at what the product has been advertised for, and then they buy it, and then they true up what it was advertised for and what they actually paid. And it's often not accurate. And if you add dynamic pricing to that for retailers as a tool, it could lead to more consumer disinformation. At the same time, electronic shelf labels are a time saver, a labor saver. You don't have to go around and put this product is on sale label on everything. So it could ultimately be a device or a tool that if used appropriately, could be helpful to retailers, especially today when there's a lot of staffing needs in retailers. So this bill really is kind of consumer protection bill to prevent the use till 2027, but then authorizing its use after 2027. Talking to Mark Paquette at the agency plans to have proposals over the next couple of years, and this bill would basically inspire those proposals to be issued to you for future action. So you will see on page 1, going to page 2, there is an amendment to the definition section in the unit pricing chapter in Title 6. It adds definition of dynamic pricing, the use of artificial intelligence to adjust prices or electronic shelf labels at any given moment. Electronic shelf labels are digital wireless display systems that retailers use to show product devices or product prices. The point of sale at which the consumer commodities are offered and displayed in such a manner that the consumer may examine and select the commodities for purchase. Retailers, anyone selling a consumer commodity, we already talked about what a consumer commodity is. It's effectively any product that is sold at retail for immediate or ultimate consumptive use. The unit price is the consumer commodity, means the retail price of a consumer commodity be expressed in terms of the retail price per unit of weight, measure, or count as the secretary designates, computed to the nearest whole cent or fraction thereof. Then you get section 2, which does allow dynamic pricing. It does allow a retailer selling a consumer commodity to use electronic shelf labels to disclose to consumers the retail price. So they get to use electronic shelf label, but in section 2, sub B, they cannot use dynamic pricing to alter the retail price or unit price while the retailer is open to the public. So you can't have that consumer that is misinformed at the point of sale and then reaches the cashier and is charged a different price. So the dynamic pricing can be used to change prices for the effective, efficient amendment of prices, but not while the retailer is open to the public. And then a retailer shall not alter the retail price or unit price of a commodity until at least 24 hours since the last alteration to the retail price or unit price for the consumer commodity. That provides consumers some surety that they see a price advertised, that they can go in and it will be what was advertised. Now, this is all dependent on Section 3, the report on the electronic shelf labels dynamic pricing. There is a moratorium. So all the same definitions are used because this is session law, but on or before January 15, 2027, a retailer shall not use electronic shelf labels or dynamic pricing to display the retail price or unit price of a consumer commodity offered for sale at point of sales. Before that, January 15, 2026, the secretary reports to you regarding the use by retailers in the state of electronic shelf labels and dynamic pricing. And the report shall include a summary of how electronic shelf labels and dynamic pricing operates, including the technology used, a summary of national state standards for regulation of the use of electronic shelf labels. And Mark Paquette at the agency said that they are looking, and there are national standards being discussed by those state associations. But it will include whether entities such as the National Institute on Standards and Technology, which is what the agency generally uses as its default standards, have adopted recommended provisions for the regulation of electronic shelf labels or dynamic pricing. And then it will have a recommendation on whether and how to use electronic shelf labels or dynamic pricing in a manner that protects consumers from unfair pricing strategies or mispricing. Then you get to the effective dates. That moratorium takes effect on passage. Those sections that allow the use of electronic shelf labels or dynamic pricing don't go into effect until January 16, 2027, a year before you get the report back from the agency on how to address electronic shelf labels and dynamic pricing. So
Year before,
yes, so the report comes back on or before January 15th, 2026. And the effective date is for that use of those shelf labels or dynamic pricing is 1 year later, January 16th, 2027.
that's the end. Okay. Any questions about the language? Representative O'Brien?
How does it work with, like a Walmart, I could see being, sort of vertically integrated, so somewhere in Arkansas, they could change, price up through all their chains, whereas, a Shaw's or something, right, has to deal with Nabisco or Coke or whoever, right, on things like slotting and sales and whether you have a Shaw's card, all that stuff. So I just wondered if, is there a way to catch all those and make it consistent?
So the requirement for the information, it's on every person who sells. It doesn't distinguish the corporate entity from the retailer. So I think if a retailer was able to implement a national price change, label change, I don't think the law currently would prohibit that. Yeah, it's really just the persons that are selling that consumer commodity. It doesn't distinguish that the person changing the label has to be in state. It's just that the retail sale has to comply with the means of disclosure and the total price and unit price being displayed. Doesn't say where that change can be made. It obviously has to be made at the point of sale in the state, purchases by the consumer. And to an extent, this already basically happens. I know one of the pharmacies that's no longer operating in the state, their prices would change based on the codes that were sent to them by their headquarters. And the retail staff wouldn't always have amended the shelf labels by the time that the codes had come in. And they routinely did it and knew that they were doing it and just paid the penalties because it was just more effective for them to just pay the penalty.
They're out of business now.
They sold their entire chain. Or sold a portion of their chain.
All right. Great. John, do you want to, I know you have a bit of a hard stop. Do you want to try and get one of your bills in before you go?
Sidonia's scheduled me for what, Friday? We can assume that.
Yeah, I
Just take her, but then, okay.
A lot of them, right?
Okay. All right. Anything else? Good. Thank you very much. All right. We will have one more bill this afternoon at 4. Representative Sheldon is scheduled. So we can take a little break until then.
Is available then?
Will.